Picture this, a glittering ballroom filled with champagne glasses and designer gowns, where a black man in an impeccable tuxedo sits calmly in the front row. Within seconds, two security guards grab his arms and begin dragging him toward the exit, while hundreds of wealthy guests watch in silence, some whispering, others filming on their phones. His face remains composed, almost serene, as if he knows something they don't. What happens next will freeze this entire room in absolute horror. But before we get there, do me a favor, hit that like button and drop a comment saying Justice SCRVD, because this story needs to be heard. Now let me take you back to how this nightmare began. The annual Metropolitan Charity Gala was the event of the season, where the city's elite gathered in their finest attire for a $5,000 per plate dinner. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead. A string quartet played softly in the corner. This was where power and privilege mingled under the guise of philanthropy. Marcus Wellington arrived precisely on time, his tailored tuxedo fitting him perfectly, a cream envelope tucked carefully in his inner pocket. He found his reserved seat in the VIP section, right up front where the evening's most important guests would sit. He settled in quietly, observing the crowd with patient eyes. That's when Karen Hastings, the event coordinator, noticed him. Her eyes narrowed as she crossed the room with quick, purposeful steps. She tapped his shoulder with barely concealed disdain and asked if he was lost or perhaps looking for the service entrance. Marcus smiled politely and showed her his engraved invitation. She barely glanced at it before insisting it must be fake or stolen. Her voice grew louder, attracting attention from nearby tables. Marcus remained calm, his voice steady as he explained he was exactly where he belonged, but Karen wasn't listening anymore. She snapped her fingers at two security guards stationed near the entrance, her face flushed with certainty that she was protecting her guests from an intruder. The guards approached hesitantly, clearly uncomfortable, but Karen's insistence left them no choice. They asked Marcus to come with them, their grip tightening on his arms when he didn't immediately stand. Around them, conversations died down as heads turned to watch the spectacle unfold. Women in glittering gowns leaned toward each other, whispering behind manicured hands. Men in expensive suits pulled out their phones, some recording, others pretending not to notice. Marcus didn't resist, didn't raise his voice, didn't make a scene. He simply stood with quiet dignity and allowed himself to be escorted toward the exit, his head held high even as humiliation burned through the room like wildfire. The crowd parted before them, creating a pathway of shame lined with judgment and assumptions. Some faces showed discomfort, others satisfaction, most just indifference. Karen followed behind, arms crossed, convinced she'd just prevented some terrible disruption to her perfect evening. As they reached the ballroom doors, the lights suddenly dimmed. A spotlight hit the stage at the front of the room. The MC, a polished woman in a silver gown, stepped up to the microphone with a broad smile. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, her voice cutting through the murmurs, "it's time to introduce tonight's very special guest of honor." The room fell into expectant silence. Marcus stopped walking. The security guards loosened their grip, sensing something had shifted. The MC continued, her voice ringing with pride through the silent ballroom. "Tonight, we're honored to welcome the extraordinary philanthropist whose $10 million donation made our new children's hospital wing possible." Marcus turned slowly, facing the crowd that had just watched his removal. Giant screens around the ballroom suddenly illuminated with a professional photograph. Marcus Wellington in the same tuxedo he wore right now, smiling confidently. "Please join me in welcoming the CEO of Wellington Technologies and our evening's guest of honor, Marcus Wellington." The silence that followed wasn't just quiet, it was suffocating. Faces that moments ago held judgment now twisted with horror and shame. Karen's expression crumbled as the blood drained from her cheeks, her mouth opening and closing without sound. The security guards released Marcus immediately, stepping back as if burned. He walked down the center aisle with unhurried grace, every eye fixed on him, phones now lowered in collective mortification. When he reached the microphone, he didn't unleash anger or demand apologies. Instead, he spoke softly about the assumptions people make based on appearance, about the exhausting reality of proving your worth in spaces where you're presumed not to belong. He announced his donation would now be split, half to the hospital, half to organizations fighting racial discrimination. "Because," he said, looking directly at Karen, "charity begins with how we treat the person standing right in front of us." Karen was escorted out by management minutes later, terminated on the spot. The video went viral by morning, sparking nationwide conversations. But Marcus had already moved forward, transforming his humiliation into purpose. Months later, he stood at the hospital wings opening, surrounded by grateful families of every background, proof that dignity ultimately prevails. Justice served.